He conquered the known world before turning 30. He never lost a battle. He founded more than 70 cities. He built an empire that stretched from Greece to India in just 11 years. And then, at 32, he just stopped. But the version you see in school books is the sanitized one, the convenient one, the version that leaves out the most disturbing secrets of a man who was at the same time a military genius, a ruthless conqueror, and a deeply contradictory figure. Because behind the epic battles and the cities he founded, there are 5 secrets that historians know but rarely put together. Secrets about his origins, about his psychology, about what really happened when he stepped off the stage, and about where the greatest conqueror of antiquity is buried to this day. If you're into real history, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. See, hit the bell and drop a like before continuing. This video goes deeper than any popular documentary about Alexander. There's a figure in Alexander's story that popular documentaries almost always downplay, and that serious historians consider absolutely central to understanding who Alexander was and why he became what he became. That figure is Olympias, his mother. Olympias wasn't a passive queen. She was a priestess of the Bacchic mysteries, the secret rituals of Dionysus, and slept with domesticated snakes around her, something Plutarch recorded with obvious discomfort. According to the same historian, she would bring huge snakes into religious processions, which terrified even seasoned men. King Philip II himself, Alexander's father, is said to have fled the room after finding her sleeping wrapped around a serpent. But Olympias's real influence over Alexander was far more strategic than ritualistic. From childhood, she planted in him the conviction that his true father wasn't Philip II, but Zeus. The narrative she built and carefully maintained was precise. On the night before her marriage to Philip, she had dreamed that a lightning bolt struck her womb, and that this bolt was Zeus taking human form. Alexander grew up believing, or at least acting as if he believed, that he was the son of a god, and that belief shaped every military and political decision he made. When he reached Egypt and visited the oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis, the priest greeted him as the son of the god. And Alexander walked out of that temple completely transformed. The soldiers who accompanied him didn't know exactly what had happened inside that sanctuary. He never told them. But Olympias was also brutal. When Philip II was assassinated by his bodyguard Pausanias in 336 BC, Olympias was immediately accused of orchestrating the plot. She had a clear motive. Philip had married another woman, a pure Macedonian, putting Alexander's position as heir at risk. After Alexander came to power, Olympias eliminated Philip's rival and her daughter without hesitation. Alexander knew everything, and he chose strategic silence, because the most dangerous woman in all of Macedonia was his mother. June 323 BC. Alexander is in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon on his bed. Fever, progressive paralysis, 12 days of agony, and around him his most powerful generals, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, Seleucus, Craterus, watching and calculating. When Alexander finally stopped breathing, the first thing the generals needed to know was the answer to a single question. Who gets the empire? The most well-known accounts say that when asked, Alexander whispered one word, krateroi, meaning to the strongest. An answer open enough for each general to believe he was the chosen one. But there's a detail that this standard version leaves out. There's a text discovered by British researchers, studied for decades by the specialist Alexander David Grant, that claims to be Alexander's real testament, a document the generals themselves buried because it revealed specific instructions they had no intention of following. According to the researchers, the text was deliberately suppressed so the generals could divide the empire among themselves, which is exactly what happened in the following decades during the Wars of the Diadochi. And there was something even more unsettling. Alexander had planned conquests that none of his generals were willing to carry out: the invasion of Arabia, a circumnavigation of Africa, and possibly a campaign toward the Western Mediterranean. Plans that, if they had been followed, would have radically changed the map of the world. The generals didn't just divide the empire, they may have buried the future Alexander had laid out. Which of these secrets surprised you the most so far? Drop it in the comments. Olympias's influence or the hidden testament. I want to see your take. This is perhaps the most disturbing secret in Alexander's entire story, and it has modern scientific evidence behind it. In 2019, Dr. Catherine Hall, a senior lecturer at the University of Otago in New Zealand, published a paper in the scientific journal, The Ancient History Bulletin, proposing something that completely reshaped the debate about the conqueror's final moments. Alexander wasn't dead when his generals began preparing his body for burial. The central argument is based on a historical detail that had always puzzled scholars. Alexander's body showed no signs of decomposition for 6 full days after his supposed death. To the Greeks, this was proof of divinity. Alexander was a god, incorruptible. But Dr. Hall identified a medical explanation. Alexander likely contracted an infection by Campylobacter pylori, a bacterium found in improperly prepared food, common in Babylon at the time, which triggered Guillain-Barré syndrome, an autoimmune disorder that attacks the peripheral nervous system. The syndrome causes progressive paralysis, starting in the extremities and moving toward the torso. The victim remains conscious throughout the entire process, but breathing becomes so shallow it can be nearly imperceptible. The Greeks of 323 BC didn't check for a pulse to confirm death. They checked for visible breathing, and Alexander's reduced by near-total paralysis simply wasn't visible to the naked eye. The implication is that Alexander may have been fully conscious, unable to move or communicate, while the men around him prepared his body, discussed the division of the empire, and made decisions that would reshape the ancient world. Without realizing the conqueror was still there, trapped inside his own body, hearing everything. The body only began to decompose 6 days later, because only then did the actual biological process begin. And there's a secret about Alexander's psychology that's rarely discussed with the depth it deserves. The relationship between him and Hephaestion, and what happened when Hephaestion died. Hephaestion grew up alongside Alexander from childhood. They studied together under Aristotle. They trained together. They fought together in every campaign. Aristotle even described them as one soul living in 2 bodies, the same phrase Homer used for Achilles and Patroclus, a comparison Alexander himself consciously embraced. In 324 BC, in Ecbatana, Hephaestion suddenly fell ill. He seemed to be recovering when, after a heavy meal and wine, he collapsed and died that very same day. Some modern theories suggest typhoid fever with intestinal perforation triggered by overeating during recovery. But what Alexander did next is what reveals the deepest secret about who he really was beneath the armor. He ordered the doctor who had treated Hephaestion to be crucified for negligence. He ordered the manes of all the army's horses to be cut as a sign of mourning. He had the sacred fire of Ecbatana extinguished, an act reserved exclusively for kings. He wrote to the oracle of Ammon asking that Hephaestion be declared a god. He planned a funeral that, according to Diodorus Siculus, would cost more than 10,000 talents of gold, a sum no single funeral had ever cost in history. And then Alexander spiraled. In the weeks that followed, he drank heavily, launched himself into military campaigns that looked more like emotional outlets than political strategy. 6 months later, he was the one lying in a bed in Babylon. Many historians believe Alexander never recovered from Hephaestion's death, that the conqueror who had faced armies of hundreds of thousands without backing down was brought down not by a battle, but by the absence of a single person. Alexander's greatest secret isn't in the past, it's in the present. After his death in Babylon, Alexander's body was placed in a golden coffin, inside a golden sarcophagus, and transported in an elaborate funeral carriage. The original destination was Macedonia, but General Ptolemy intercepted the funeral procession along the way, an act that was basically stealing the greatest symbol of political legitimacy in antiquity, and took the body to Egypt. Ptolemy knew exactly what he was doing. Having Alexander's body meant having the right to rule as his successor. It was a surgical political move disguised as devotion. The body was first placed in Memphis and later in Alexandria, the city Alexander himself had founded, where it remained for centuries in a monumental tomb. Julius Caesar visited the tomb in 48 BC. Mark Antony and Cleopatra did the same. Augustus went there, touched the mummified body and, according to accounts, accidentally broke the mummy's nose in his act of reverence. The Roman Emperor Caracalla removed Alexander's tunic from the sarcophagus and wore it himself, as a gesture of identification with the conqueror. The last recorded mention of the tomb dates to the 3rd century AD. After that, silence. Alexandria was destroyed, rebuilt, converted to Islam, conquered by the Arabs. The modern city was built over the ancient one. More than 140 archaeological expeditions have already tried to find Alexander's tomb. Some believe it lies beneath the historic center of the city, now covered by inhabited buildings. Others suggest it may be beneath the Mosque of the Prophet Daniel, which local tradition says was built over a much older structure. In 2019, the Netflix documentary series Alexander, The Making of a God featured Professor Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones from Cardiff University, who stated with confidence, "I believe it was protected, that it was hidden. The conqueror who was never defeated in battle is now in absence. An address that once existed, was visited by emperors, and then simply vanished from history. The greatest conqueror the world has ever seen has no identified tomb, no confirmed resting place. He is somewhere beneath a modern city, under traffic, buildings and centuries of silence. A mother who planted in her son the conviction that he was the son of a god, a testament buried by ambitious generals. The disturbing possibility that he was still conscious while they prepared his body, a death that may have cut short his will to go on, and a tomb the whole world has been searching for 2,300 years without success. Alexander the Great wasn't just a general, he was a living contradiction. At once the most powerful man in the world, and someone deeply vulnerable to the same forces that drive any human being. A mother's love, a friend's loyalty, the fear of being forgotten. And maybe that's exactly why he's still being searched for. Not just in Alexandria, but in every history book, every documentary, every conversation about who the greatest human beings to ever live were. Is because Alexander was never fully found. Not in life, and certainly not after. If this video made you see Alexander in a different way, drop a like, share it with someone who's into history, and click on the next video on your screen. It was made especially for those who made it all the way to the end.